Feel the sharp sting of the last coin rattling in an empty pocket, the desperate echo of a shattered dream, the dark certainty that the only way out lies on an uncertain path, where every step could be the last. This isn't a tale of triumph, but the raw, visceral chronicle of a desperate gamble, of a hope clinging to the edge of an abyss, and of a price that survival itself might not be able to pay. Prepare to witness the breaking point. Important warning: this narrative is a work of fiction inspired by real-life experiences. We do not encourage illegal border crossings. Many lives are lost in attempts to cross borders. Our objective is to foster empathy, reflection, and awareness about the harsh realities faced by those seeking alternative lives. We support legal and safe migration routes. For reliable information, please consult official channels as indicated. From what corner of the world are you following this story? Have you ever felt the urge to start over somewhere new, or do you know the anguish of someone facing such a decision? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your participation creates a connection and motivates us to bring more poignant stories to light. If this narrative has already touched your heart, please leave a like and subscribe to be notified of new impactful stories. By commenting and sharing, you help amplify voices that are often unheard. In the labyrinthine and vibrant Port-au-Prince, Haiti, Miguel's life slipped through his fingers like the fine sand of a relentless hourglass, each grain carrying away a piece of his youth and his once colorful dreams. Before, there had been a tacit promise in the breeze that drifted in from the sea, a breath of hope that painted the future in less somber tones. He remembered the unburdened laughter of his childhood, the sweet scent of ripe mangoes that hung in the air of local markets, the simplicity of a life that, though humble, seemed to have its own secure rhythm. Miguel's days were a whirlwind of faded colors, marked by the humid heat that hung over the city like a heavy shroud, permeating every narrow alley and every precarious structure with the acrid smell of pollution, dust, and a persistent poverty that refused to leave. His routine was an exhaustive and repetitive dance between the relentless search for work and the daily struggle to secure the bare minimum for his small family. The first rays of sun could barely pierce the curtain of dust that hung over the zinc rooftops and the tangle of improvised electrical wires, and already they would find him in the bustling streets, offering his services with a hoarse voice and a dry throat. He was a porter, an improvised bricklayer, an assistant to anyone who needed strong, desperate arms. He felt the weight of burdens on his aching shoulders, the roughness of cement and wood on his cracked hands, his thick, calloused skin telling a silent story of endless effort. Sweat streamed down his forehead and into his eyes, blurring his vision as he negotiated each task with the hope of earning a few gourds, a few coins, to take home. It was an existence of constant toil and scarcity, a battle against the invisibility of poverty, yet woven with the fragile thread of hope, a future he idealized in the curious eyes and easy smile of his youngest daughter, Sophie. She was the soft melody in his noisy daily life, the reason behind every drop of sweat, a 4-year-old child who transformed the hardest of trials into an unwavering reason to persist. He watched her run through the small dirt yard, her dark hair flying in the wind, her childish laughter echoing in their tiny wooden and zinc house. She was the light amidst the darkness that often tried to consume him. Miguel knew the chaotic pulse of the city, felt its feverish rhythm beneath his worn sandals, and his soul, once vibrant with the dreams of youth, now sang a melody of pure survival alongside his family, composed of Isabel, his wife, and Sophie. The warm breeze that blew from the sea, carrying with it the salty and distant smell of a perhaps better future, was, for him, the last vestige of optimism amidst a relentless reality that seemed to close in around them. The empty promises of the government, the corruption that corroded the nation's soul, all contributed to the feeling of stagnation, of an invisible weight that prevented them from rising. But then, this hesitant melody was brutally interrupted. by a tremor that shook the very soul of the earth, a primal roar that rose from the depths of the abyss. It wasn't a simple tremor, but an underground rumble, an ancestral fury that made the ground dance in agony, as if the world itself was shattering into pieces. The poorly constructed concrete walls groaned and cracked under the violence of the eye. Shake, foundations trembling like teeth in a broken mouth. And the most fragile buildings, those barely standing, collapsed into a suffocating cloud of dust and rubble, swallowing dreams and lives into their belly of destruction. The deafening noise of the collapse mixed with the desperate screams of the panicked population, the cries of children, the laments of the injured, creating a terrifying cacophony that echoed through the devastated streets, a sound that ripped the fabric of reality. Miguel, in a primal instinct of protection, grabbed Sophie tightly, her small body trembling uncontrollably in his arms as they tried to shield themselves from the rain of debris falling from the sky, pieces of tile, bricks, and wood flying like projectiles. He felt the earth vibrate beneath his feet, as if a gigantic monster was stirring in its sleep, and the acrid smell of dust invaded his lungs, scratching his throat and blurring his vision. The sun, once a beacon of hope, now could barely penetrate the dense cloud of debris that hung over the city, casting a sinister and permanent shadow over the devastation. When the earth finally quieted, after seconds that felt like an eternity, it revealed an apocalyptic scene. Homes reduced to piles of rubble, streets blocked by debris, and the sepulchral silence of those who were gone, contrasting painfully with the laments of the survivors who, like him, emerged from the chaos. That smell of dust, once a fleeting nuisance in the daily life of Port-au-Prince, now carried the funereal scent of loss, despair, and the uncertainty of tomorrow. Their world, already so fragile, had shattered into 1,000 pieces. Scarcity intensified. The struggle for water and food became even more desperate amidst the collapsed infrastructure. The few remaining roads, the few humanitarian aid posts that could barely meet basic needs. But there was an even deeper anguish that gnawed at Miguel from within, a pain that eclipsed hunger and physical exhaustion. The persistent cough of his wife, Isabel. Since the earthquake, a dry, incessant cough had consumed her, debilitating her with each fit, robbing her of sleep, energy, and the little vitality she still possessed. Isabel's chest rose and fell with difficulty. Her lips grew pale, and her eyes, once bright with hope and affection, now reflected a profound and worrying fatigue, a light slowly fading. The hoarse sound of her cough echoed through the makeshift tent where they now lived, a constant reminder of her fragile health in an unsanitary and precarious environment, where dust and lack of hygiene were silent, deadly enemies. Miguel tried to alleviate her suffering with the few available resources, from herbal teas he learned from his grandmother, to cold compresses on her forehead. But basic medicines, when found, were rare and expensive, an unattainable luxury for his homeless family. And the nearest hospital, already overburdened and precarious before the tragedy, was now a chaos of pain, injured, and scarcity, a place where the hope of healing seemed even more distant, almost a mirage. He felt Isabel's forehead hot, her body feverish and frail under the thin, dirty blanket that protected them from the night air, and he heard her shallow, labored breathing, a sound that filled him with growing, suffocating dread. The sight of his wife wasting away, her strength ebbing with each passing day, was silent torture, an overwhelming weight in his heart, a feeling of powerlessness that paralyzed him from within. He smelled that night, under the heavy mantle of a starless sky, with only the moon timidly guiding them, he set out. The silence of the sleeping village was broken only by the echo of his own uncertain steps on the dirt road and the muffled sound of Mateo's suppressed crying, a cry he tried to soothe with whispered lullabies, cradling him in his arms as if it were the last time. He didn't look back. He couldn't. Looking back meant succumbing to fear, giving up the only chance left. The weeks that followed their departure from Port-au-Prince were a relentless ordeal, a descent into a personal hell beneath the scorching sun, an arduous and inhumane journey through the rugged and hostile landscape that separated Haiti from the Dominican Republic. Miguel and Isabel became exhausted, dust-caked figures in a scene of steep mountains, arid valleys, and dense forests, their bodies battered by the merciless sun that seemed to drain every drop of life, and by the constant thirst that burned their throats like fire. The oppressive daytime heat, bordering on unbearable, scorched their skin to the point of pain, leaving blisters and cracks, while the fine dust, kicked up with every step on the improvised trail, coated their sweaty faces, infiltrated their nostrils, and made every breath difficult, scratching their already tired lungs. With each steep ascent through the mountains, Miguel's muscles screamed in protest, throbbing with chronic pain, and Isabel's cough intensified, cutting through the silence of the landscape with a painful, worrying sound, a constant reminder of her fragility. The bitter taste of deprivation clung to their tongues, a mixture of dust, sweat, and despair, and the sight of Isabel stumbling with each step tightened Miguel's heart with a searing fear, a lump in his throat that made it impossible to swallow. He smelled the metallic tang of his own sweat mixed with the rancid scent of dry earth, an olfactory signature of their misery. The winding, rocky paths seemed endless, each turn revealing only more of the same desolate scenery, testing the limits of their physical and mental endurance to the breaking point. They crossed treacherous rivers, the icy water lashing at their ankles, the current pulling them with a menacing force that seemed to want to swallow them whole, to snatch away the little they had left. Night brought a biting cold that penetrated their weary bones, leaving them numb and trembling, and the fear of dangerous encounters with inhumane smugglers, with ruthless bandits, or with border authorities, hung in the air like a constant shadow, an invisible threat that kept them on edge. Extreme exhaustion forced them to seek shelter in cold, damp, dark caves, or beneath solitary, withered trees, where sleep, when it came, was brief and interrupted by worry, by the wheezing in Isabel's chest, and by the strange sounds of the nocturnal forest. Hunger became a constant companion, gnawing at their stomachs with searing pains and weakening their already debilitated bodies with each passing day without proper food. Each small wild fruit found or shared sip of water was a momentary relief amidst the deprivation, a liquid miracle to be savored slowly. Isabel's body withered with each passing day, her cough growing deeper and her breathing more difficult, each inspiration a battle. Miguel supported her at every instant, carrying part of her weight, offering his hand for her to lean on, whispering words of encouragement, silent prayers, and desperate attempts to keep the flame of hope alive in her tired, dull eyes, the touch of her feverish skin, the sound of her laborious, forced breathing, were a constant and painful reminder of the urgency of their journey and the imminent danger of death that stalked them. When Isabel could no longer walk on her own, when her trembling legs finally gave way under the weight of exhaustion and illness, collapsing to the ground, Miguel picked her up. His body, already exhausted and aching on the verge of physical and mental collapse, found a surprising reserve of strength, an energy he didn't know he possessed, driven by desperate love and an unyielding determination to save his wife. He felt Isabel's weight, a weight that seemed to increase with every kilometer traveled, but he dared not put her down, fearing she wouldn't have the strength to stand again, that every stop meant another step closer to death. The sound of her weak breath in his ear, the warmth of her forehead against his shoulder, were his only compass in that hell, his sole motivation to press on through the harsh landscape, under a merciless sun that offered no respite. He told her stories of a better future, of a place where she could breathe freely, without the dust and illness, and receive the medical care she needed in a real hospital, though doubt haunted him with every step, like a persistent shadow, whispering about the futility of all their effort. The words were a balm for her, a comfort amidst unbearable pain, and an anchor for his own sanity, a thin thread that kept him connected to reality, preventing him from succumbing to total despair. He smelled Isabel's sweet scent mixed with acidic sweat and dust, a pungent aroma of love and suffering. Every night was a battle against the biting cold that seemed to drain their souls, against the dampness that clung to their skin, and against the constant fear that lurked in the shadows. The wind howled through the mountains, carrying with it the omen of danger, the sound of branches breaking in the strong wind, and the dense darkness concealed unknown threats, wild animals, criminal groups patrolling migration routes, the so-called coyotes who preyed on others' despair, and the border patrol. Miguel hugged Isabel with desperate force, trying to warm her with the last remnants of his own body heat, protecting her from the roughness of the ground and the insects that bit her feverish skin. He heard her shallow, irregular breathing, her heart beating faintly against his, a rhythm that seemed to slow with each passing hour, with each dawn that announced itself, bringing with it the promise of more suffering. Sleep was an unattainable luxury, a brief oblivion before the cold, brutal reality of morning returned to bite them, reminding them of the relentless, seemingly endless journey. Exhaustion accumulated in their bodies like an unbearable burden, but he knew he couldn't stop. To stop meant death. Have you ever witnessed the unbreakable strength of someone fighting for a loved one's health, against all odds? Share your experience in the comments. Your story can inspire and comfort others facing similar challenges, showing that human resilience is infinite. The border, across the vast and desolate lands marking the limit with the Dominican Republic, finally materialized before Miguel's eyes as a tenuous, almost unreal line amidst sparse vegetation and scattered guard posts. There was no grand gate, no welcoming signs, just an invisible yet palpable boundary, delineated by the hostile presence of armed guards and a subtle shift in the landscape, which appeared drier and more barren than the side they had left. Exhaustion clouded Miguel's senses, blurring his vision and muddling his thoughts. But the proximity of their goal rekindled a fragile, almost extinguished flame of hope in his chest, a fleeting warmth amidst the cold of despair. He carried Isabel, in his arms, now a burden of pain and fragility, with the care of someone carrying a precious treasure, trying to avoid the most exposed paths, moving stealthily in the shadows of the approaching dawn, like a wounded animal seeking refuge. The night's silence was tense, an omen of imminent danger, broken only by the distant sound of motor vehicles patrolling the area and the rustling of dry leaves beneath his tired feet, a sound that seemed to echo in his ears like a drumbeat. Fear gripped his heart, an invisible hand squeezing his chest, but the desperate need to reach the other side, to find help for Isabel, propelled him forward, a force that came from the depths of his exhausted soul. He could almost smell medicine, hospitals, air that wasn't laden with dust and despair. The scent of freedom, though still distant, seemed almost within reach. It was then that voices in Spanish, firm and authoritative, shattered the deceptive quiet of dawn. Bright, powerful flashlights suddenly ignited, cutting through the darkness and shining directly at them, momentarily blinding him. "Alto! Deténganse ahí!" The command, laden with threat, echoed in the air, dispelling any shred of hope Miguel dared to harbor, replacing it with a chilling panic that climbed his spine. The shock paralyzed him, fear chilling his blood in his veins, robbing him of the ability to reason or move. Miguel hesitated for an instant, his body rigid, clutching Isabel tighter, as if he could shield her from that imminent threat, as if he could hide her fragility from the cruel world. In seconds, they were surrounded. The guards approached, their faces expressionless and grim under the merciless flashlight beams, their weapons pointed at them, brutal symbols of authority and danger. The feeling of being caught, of having failed in his desperate mission, of having brought Isabel this far for nothing was overwhelming, a devastating blow to his already wounded soul. Isabel coughed violently in his arms, her frail body convulsing in a painful spasm, her small lungs fighting for air. The wheezing sound from her chest was almost a cry for help that seemed to be ignored by everyone but Miguel. He pleaded for help, his voice torn by anguish and despair, his eyes brimming with tears that mixed with the dust and sweat on his face. "Please, my wife is very sick. She needs a doctor. Ayuda!" His desperate and sincere words were met with cold indifference, drowned out by the dry, robotic orders of the guards who seemed deaf to his pain and his anguish as a husband and father. The scene became a blur of flashing lights and distorted shadows, the sound of shouts and commands blending into an auditory torment that left him confused, dizzy, and terrified. They were separated. One of the guards grabbed Isabel roughly, tearing her from Miguel's arms. The image of Isabel being taken away, her pale, exhausted face turned towards him with a look of fear and suffering, her weak hand outstretched in his direction in a mute gesture of plea, cut Miguel's heart like a sharp knife, a cold blade that ripped through his soul. He tried to resist. He screamed. He struggled, but he was restrained by the brutal force of the guards, immobilized, watching helplessly as Isabel disappeared into the darkness, swallowed by the unknown. The pain of separation, the powerlessness. In the face of the situation, the loss of control over his beloved's destiny were unbearable. An agony that made him feel like he was breaking apart inside. His pleas for information about Isabel were ignored, and he felt increasingly desperate and alone, a grain of sand lost in the desert. Detained in a cold, damp, and dark cell, the concrete walls seeming to close in on him, time dragged slowly, each minute an eternity of anguish and uncertainty. He didn't know what had happened to Isabel, if she was receiving help, or if her condition had worsened, if she was alive or dead. The uncertainty was constant torture, eroding his hope and fueling his worst fears, a relentless voice in his mind whispering catastrophes. The smell of disinfectant in the confined space, mixed with the metallic scent of his own fear and the dust that still clung to his skin, made him feel sick, nauseated by reality. A few days later, which felt like decades, amidst the icy monotony of detention under the dim light of a bare bulb hanging from the ceiling, Miguel received the cold, impersonal news from an officer. The man's voice was monotonous, devoid of emotion, a distant and incomprehensible sound that seemed to come from another world, from a parallel reality. "Your wife didn't survive the journey. She passed away. She's been released for burial. Next. Case." The words hit Miguel like a brutal blow, a lightning bolt that struck him squarely, crushing any lingering hope that might still exist in his heart. The air left his lungs, the ground seemed to disappear beneath his feet, and a searing pain ripped through his chest, an open wound that would never heal. Miguel's body convulsed in a mute spasm, an uncontrollable tremor that shook him from head to toe. He felt his body instantly grow cold, blood draining from his veins, as if a black hole had opened in his chest, sucking out all his life, all his essence. Isabel, his companion, his strength, the reason for his desperate journey. She was gone, and he hadn't been able to save her. The image of her pale, tired face, of her weak hand outstretched for him, projected into his mind with brutal clarity. And he felt the pain she must have felt in her last moments, the loneliness, the fear, his absence. A silent, primal scream erupted from his soul, a lament that no one heard, a sound that only he could feel in his gut, in every fiber of his being. He fell to his knees on the cold cell floor, his hands clutching his own chest, as if he could stem the hemorrhage of his soul, the unbearable emptiness that had settled within him. No tears came, only a cold, paralyzing void, a pain so profound that it made him feel he would never be whole again, that an essential part of him had died with Isabel, and that life as he knew it had come to an end. If this story has stirred feelings of sadness and compassion within you, please leave a heart emoji in the comments to express your solidarity with Miguel in this moment of overwhelming loss. Your empathy is a balm amidst the deepest pain.
Miguel was deported back to Haiti, the same land he had left with the desperate hope of a better future, of healing for his beloved Isabel. The journey back was a silent torment. Every kilometer traveled through the familiar landscape was a
stab in his heart, a cruel reminder of the failure of his mission and the irreparable loss. The return brought no relief, no sense of being home, but rather a deeper plunge into an overwhelming emptiness, an emotional desert that stretched infinitely within his soul. Every street in Port-au-Prince, once a scene of struggle and hope, was now a museum of painful memories, a graveyard of shattered dreams and of his beloved wife. The earthquake rubble that still littered the alleys, the dust that hung in the air like a veil of mourning, all echoed the desolation he felt inside. The makeshift tent where they had lived, the ruins of their old house, the few belongings that had survived the catastrophe, were now silent witnesses to Isabel's absence, to a void that nothing in the world could fill. The smell of smoke and burning trash mixed with the humid heat seemed more suffocating than ever, a reflection of the heavy air his soul breathed. The pain was a constant burden, a physical weight that crushed his chest, stealing his breath, making every inhale a conscious effort. The nights were long and dark, haunted by memories of Isabel, by the echoes of her faint cough and her suffering gaze that refused to leave him. He saw her face in every shadow, heard her voice in the whisper of the wind, felt the touch of her cold, frail skin in his empty arms. Guilt gnawed at him from within, a silent monster that fed on his remorse. I should have stayed. I should have done more. I exposed her to danger. I failed to protect her. This internal voice haunted him incessantly, turning every waking minute into torture, every sleep into vivid, cruel nightmares. Hunger and thirst, once his greatest concerns, now seemed irrelevant compared to the excruciating pain in his soul. The midst of his solitude and despair, in an instinctive search for something that would connect him to Isabel, Miguel found a small, worn notebook with a faded cover and some yellowed pages that Isabel used to write down her accounts and small thoughts. Its pages, once filled with delicate handwriting but now mostly blank, became the refuge for his pain, the place where he could express the longing and remorse that consumed him. The letters started out crooked and hesitant, as if his hand was unaccustomed to giving form to unspeakable grief, but soon gained fluidity, becoming a river of words that poured from his shattered soul. He wrote letters to Isabel, knowing they would never be read, for there was nowhere to send them, but desperately needing to share his pain, his memories, and his eternal love. He told her about the sun that still rose, though for him it seemed grayer and colorless, about the wind that blew through the city, bringing smells that now hurt and evoked happy memories of a past that would not return. He told her about the pain that consumed him, about the longing that squeezed him and prevented him from moving forward, paralyzing him. The words were a river of tears and ink, carrying away a little of the unbearable weight, one tear after another soaking the paper, mixing with the ink, transforming the pain into something tangible, something that could be touched and, perhaps, understood. The rough touch of the paper in his fingers, the soft sound of the pen scratching the page, were his only companions, his only solace amidst the desolation that surrounded him. Over time, Miguel's pain did not diminish. For Isabel's loss would be an eternal scar, but it transformed. It metamorphosed into a deep, throbbing scar, a constant reminder of his loss, but also of the strength of the love that bound them. He found a somber comfort in helping others who had lost loved ones in the earthquake or in frustrated migration. Attempts, those who, like him, bore souls marked by tragedy. He sat with them on the dusty sidewalks, under the scarce shade of trees, and shared his story, not with fiery speeches or empty self-help platitudes, but with the raw, visceral truth of his own experience. He warned about the deadly dangers of the illegal journey and the desperate importance of seeking safe alternatives, even if they seemed distant or impossible. His voice was hoarse from grief, but firm in his determination to honor Isabel's memory, to turn his tragedy into a warning for others. He spoke of the dust that blinded and suffocated, of the thirst that slowly killed, of the cold that numbed, of the human cruelty encountered along the way, of the unimaginable pain of separation. He did not find a fairy tale happy ending. There was no redemption in a new life in dreams, but amidst